Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So here's another deck profile for you guys today. This time it's part 3 of my Halloween countdown special. So this time it's on Lair of Darkness. I've been meaning to get to this deck for a long time. I just haven't gotten around to it. And well, I decided to finally piece it together the way I needed to, especially for this current format. Made this as competitive as I possibly could. And honestly, without this deck, I would never have gotten this far in this channel. So honestly, I owe a lot to this Lair of Darkness deck, mainly because it's the deck that generally got me so far on my views. Like, it was getting me subscribers ever since the structure deck first came out, and I've been doing so many things to experiment with this deck. So yeah, like I said, I kind of owe it to this deck. So yeah, anyway, figured I'd just show you guys what I got this time around, and let's get started. So main deck's 40 cards. This is a trap heavy deck, so basically it is a form of control deck, not a combo deck in any way. But it does still have some small bits of combos, just to, just so you guys know how to get this deck started. So starting off with the best card in the entire deck, 3 copies of Lilith. So this card's normal summon. Its attack points get cut in half, but that's not important. Her ability is the one that really counts. So quick effect, you contribute a dark monster, and you can reveal 3 trap cards, and your opponent has to pick one of them at random to get set on your side of the field. So this does not go to your hand. And with Lair of Darkness, which is generally the gimmick of this deck, you get to tribute one of your opponent's monsters instead. So yeah, Lilith is pretty busted. It's definitely an amazing card in its own right. And yeah, it pretty much does everything you need. And the fact that it tributes for cost, so cards like Dragoon, like, it won't be able to negate because of the fact that, again, it's cost. It's going to be off the field before it even gets the chance to negate anything. So yeah, that's just usually how this deck works. Next up, 3 Arima. So basically, this is your additional copies of Terraform. You discard this to search Lair of Darkness. It also has a cool draw effect. So once per turn, you can either tribute a dark monster to draw 1 card, or if you tribute any other dark monster except itself, you can search any dark monster with 2,000 or more defense. So this is basically how you get access to your Darkest Diabolus a little faster. So yeah, Arima, definitely an amazing card in its own right. Next up, I'm only running 1 copy of the new Malice Lady of Lament. This came out in Rise of the Duelist. So her ability reads is that you can attribute 2 monsters, then target one of your normal traps that is banished and or in your graveyard, set that target, but place it on the bottom of the deck when it leaves the field. Now keep in mind, this is also tribute for cost, but the fact that it requires 2 monsters is a little bad, but at least you could attribute one of your own monsters and one of your opponent's monsters too. So it's a good way just to get rid of one of those tokens that you don't really need. So yeah, that's usually the best way to use Malice. It's just like more of a late game kind of card. But yeah, I think 1 is perfectly fine. I just don't see any reason to run this at 2. So yeah, 1 should be fine. And it's searchable anyway, and I'll get to why later. Anyway, next up, 1 Darkest Diabolus. I was thinking of running 2, but I think 1 is just fine, honestly, because again, it's searchable. So this card basically has the power to rip cards out of your opponent's hands. You contribute a dark monster, and your opponent has to choose any card he wants in his hand, but he has to either place it on the top or the bottom of the deck. And the fact that, again, you contribute one of your opponent's monsters for costs with Lair of Darkness out, it's pretty good. And also, this card cannot be targeted or tributed by your opponent. So no kaijus, no spear mode, not even on Nibiru. Not that you even need to worry about Nibiru at all. So yeah, definitely an amazing card. Moving on. 1 Skarm. So basically, the only reason I'm running this simply is because, 1, you can easily special summon this for free, or you can just set it later on and then just let your opponent pop it. And plus, it's got a pretty good defense stat. So 2,000 defense. As soon as it's flip face up, as soon as you summon out another monster that's not a Burning Abyss, it'll pop itself, and you can search out either Malice or Lilith later on. So yeah, definitely an amazing card. Next up, 1 Artifact Scythe, and of course, Artifact Moral Attack. So basically, these are the best artifacts to play. 1 to lock out your opponent from summoning from the extra deck, 1 to pop a card. And plus, we are running Artifact Sanctum too, so yeah, definitely a good way just to, apply a little pressure to your opponent, just keep beating them with all these little monsters, little by little, just drain them of their resources, basically. For Hand Trap, I'm actually running 3 copies of Ash Blossom. I am running Impermanence too, but we'll get to that later on, since it can also be brought out by regular means like Lilith or Trap Trick. That's just one of the things about it, so that's why I'm not going to put Impermanence up just quite yet. Anyway, moving on to spells. Running 3 copies of Lair. This is basically the main field spell of the deck. Turns everything on the field into darks. And once per turn, if you were to tribute for a cost, you can tribute one of your opponent's monsters. And as a mandatory effect, during the end phase, depending on however many monsters you tributed during either player's turn, If it's your own turn, you summon tokens on your side of the field. If it was your opponent's turn, you summon tokens to his side of the field. And again, this is a mandatory effect. So I recommend using a dice just to keep track of how many monsters you've distributed during a turn. And then that way you know how many tokens to summon depending on whose turn it was. Anyway, moving on. 1 terraforming. So basically I'm playing 4 copies of Lair. Next up. Well, technically I'm playing 7 copies of Lair, so because of Arima. Anyway, Pot of Extravagance, I'm sorry. Decided to add this instead of a Lair of Darkness because the Lair of Darkness, though it's a good card, my monster lineup is very, very small, so, and again, with the exception of Ash Blossom, it's a fire monster, so yeah, the risk is too high, but Pot of Extravagance just seemed to be the better choice. And plus, you don't really rely on your extra deck quite as much as you'd think, so yeah, definitely something to consider. 3 Super Poly, you know, again, everything turns into dark, so you got plenty of targets for this, so don't worry. Alright, so that's it for spells. Now moving on to my traps. Starting off with 3 copies of Trap Trick, so this is basically the 6 copies of Lilith. It basically does the same thing. Banish 1 normal trap from your deck except itself, and set 1 card of the same name directly from your deck. And also it can be activated in the same turn. However, here's the thing. For the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, you can only activate 1 more trap card. So again, it's for the rest of the turn. So you can play any other number of traps prior to this card, and then that way you can at least still, you know, stun your opponent whenever you need to. Next up, 3 Artifact Sanctum. You know, it can also punish your opponent if he pops it too, so definitely a good way to get your Scythe or your Moral Attack. And again, if your opponent pops it, you get to pop a card in exchange. 3 Impermanents, you know, I mean, it's literally one of the best hand traps of this format, and it basically well, it plays around Triple Tactics talents. Next, 3 Back to the Front. So Revival is very key to this strategy, especially for your Liliths. You definitely need to keep that on the field as much as possible. 2 Dinomyscus. I'm not running that Dogmatica trap card. It is good, but the problem is sometimes I do need to get into my extra deck sometimes, and yeah, I'd rather play Dinomyscus. At least with this card, you could banish the card you're targeting, so that's one of the things about it. For the 1-0s, 1 Metaverse, you know, it's another Terraforming. And lastly, 1 Skildred, which seems to be becoming a staple for this deck because Lilith's effect will still trigger off if you tribute herself, have her tribute herself. And of course, thanks to Skildred, you can also tribute for cost still, so yeah. Just the effects will not resolve, but at least, you know, again, you can still remove cards fairly easily through attributing effects. So definitely something to consider. Alright, now moving on to the extra deck. Extra deck's pretty self-explanatory. I'm actually running quite a few 2-0s simply because of Pot of Extravagance. So starting off with 2 copies of Beat Cop. Definitely a good way to add some protection. 2 Barricade Board Blocker, so your opponent doesn't really mess with your field spells, and also can recur your field spells too. Next up, 1 Artifact Dagda. So this basically gives you another access to Artifact Scythe. And yeah, definitely something just to consider. 1 Verte Anaconda, you know, for the Super Poly card mainly. 1 Wee Witch's Apprentice. Decided to cut it down to just 1. I think I ran it at 2 last time. I forget. And of course, one of my personal favorites, Topologic Bomber Dragon. It's super good in this deck. If you can bring it out and you can basically abuse the Torment tokens, just summon 1 on any of the arrows, blow up your opponent's monsters on the main monster zone. So yeah, and that's pretty much it for the Link monsters. Now for the Super Poly cards. 2 Starving Venom, definitely the best target right now. 1 Predaplan Dragastapelia. This basically outs Dragoon. So since Dragoon is already a fusion monster, you can just summon out a dark monster, Super Poly, make this, and you're pretty much good to go. Next, 1 Predaplant Trifeo Veridum. Just requires 3 dark monsters on the field, and this can include those tokens too. So yeah, it's just an amazing card overall. So when your opponent special summons a monster from the extra deck, while you control this fusion monster, quick effect, you can negate the summon, and if you do, destroy that monster or monsters. So this can also stop pendulum summons too. Not that you really need to, or there's not really many pendulum decks right now anyway. And if your opponent controls a monster with a predator counter, you can special summon this card from your graveyard in defense mode. So, and thanks to Dragastapelia, that is possible. So no need to worry. 1 Mud Dragon of the Swamp, and the last 2 cards are actually for Waking the Dragon, since I run it in the side deck. 1 Last Word from Another Planet, and Ultimate Falcon. I mean, why not, right? Alright, for the side deck, I'm starting to see this a lot in the side decks now. 3 copies and no material. It's still pretty good to this in this format, especially against like combo decks that utilize needle fiber. This basically puts a damper on the strategy. So if you can hit that needle fiber, they can't really do much with it because usually they're just going to go into link cross. So yeah, no material, pretty good. So why not? 3 Nibiru, since again, you know, combo decks for like other control strategies, evenly matched. I also got compulsory evacuation device. Figured it's not too bad of a side tech. 2 heavy storm duster, you know, it's a searchable trap through Lilith and trap trick. And last but not least, waking the dragon. Since, you know, it kind of punches players who play cards like Harpy's Feathers Duster or Cosmic Cyclone. If they hit this card, I can bring out my last word from another planet and they'll never be able to summon monsters. So, yeah, why not? Alright, so that's all I got for you guys today. Hope you enjoy this, and I will catch you guys again next time.